It's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This year, Queens Public Library joins our nation in paying homage to the visionaries and trailblazers who have shaped AANHPI history, made lasting contributions to our country, and continue to influence our collective future. Join us for our special programs and enjoy our book recommendations, resources, and much more at queenslib.org/AANHPI. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and QPL is joining the national movement to bring awareness to mental health and to fight the stigma that surrounds it. We're also offering programs, workshops, and resources designed to help teens build the coping strategies that will assist them now and in the future. Visit queenslibrary.org to learn more. New York City's libraries are facing massive budget cuts. These cuts would force QPL to end Saturday service at most of our branches, reduce our classes and programs, carry fewer books and library materials, and postpone necessary repairs. We need your help. Visit queenslib.org/take-action and send a message to your elected officials today.
Good evening. This is Heidi Gelliver, and welcome to Culture Connection. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 11th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. I'm really happy to have with us tonight two women who have grown up surrounded by iconic writers. Both Priscilla Gilman and Lizzie Gottlieb have chosen to create works based on their fathers. Priscilla Gilman wrote a memoir that explored her experiences growing up in New York City as the daughter of Richard Gilman, the well-known drama and literary critic, and Lynn Nesbitt, one of New York's most successful literary agents. The Critic's Daughter is an engaging read that chronicles the adventures of a young girl coming of age as a witness to their turbulent relationship and the company of endless authors and artists. Lizzie Gottlieb is the documentary filmmaker behind Turn Every Page, The Adventures of Robert Caro and Robert Gottlieb, which explores the relationship between her father, Bob Gottlieb, and the prolific writer Bob Caro, who is famously known for The Power Broker on Robert Moses and his books on President Lyndon Johnson. Both men are giants in the literary world, Caro having somewhat of a cult following, myself included, due to his ability to bring history to life in the most dynamic way possible, illustrating through his subjects how the structures of political power function in the United States. And Gottlieb, having edited well over 600 books, including those of Joseph Heller, John le Carré, Salman Rushdie, Toni Morrison, Doris Lessing, Nora Ephron, Michael Crichton, Bill Clinton, and many, many more. The film shows the over 50-year relationship between the author and editor in an intimate way that could have only been achieved by someone this close to them. More specifically, Priscilla Gilman is a former professor of English literature at Yale University and Vassar College, and the author of two acclaimed memoirs, The Anti-Romantic Child and The Critic's Daughter, a best book of 2023 for the Washington Post and a New York Times book critic's favorite book of 2023. She teaches literature classes for Yale Alumni College, leads book groups, and is a sought-after speaker about literature, education, and the arts. Lizzie Gottlieb directs film and theater in New York. Lizzie's most recent film, Turn Every Page, which we are discussing tonight, was released in 2022. The film was named one of the 5 best documentaries of the year by the National Board of Review and was a New York Times critic's pick. Lizzie's first 2 films, Today's Man, about her brother who was on the autism spectrum, and Romeo, Romeo, about a young lesbian couple on a quest to have a baby, both aired on PBS. She also founded and ran an off-Broadway theater company dedicated to producing new plays at accessible prices. She teaches documentary directing at the New York Film Academy and is currently working on a film about Vietnam deserters. Remember, in order to watch the film, available up until May 14th, look for the link under this video in the comments to watch it free of charge, courtesy of the Queens Public Library. So, welcome, Priscilla and Lizzie. I'm really happy to have both of you here today. Before we get started, I'd love an opportunity for us to just watch the trailer to give us a little bit of context so that we can, just dive right in. So let's go ahead and cue up that trailer.
One of the greatest issues invoked by the life of Lyndon Baines Johnson, the relationship between means and ends. No question is more important than that.
I love those books. I love those books. Robert Caro's work goes so beyond empathy. There was healing in it and strength and power.
The Power Broker helped to shape how I think about politics.
He reminds us how power changes all of our lives. If we understand power, then maybe we can imagine a better future.
Bob Gottlieb is a superb editor.
The most important editor of the post-war period.
So about how many books have you edited?
Between 600 and 700.
Bob cared as much about the writing as I did.
Two guys the best in their field. Bob Caro, the greatest political writer of our time. Bob Gottlieb, the greatest editor of his time.
Robert Caro's in his 80s, and everybody wants the story to be finished. He's running out of time.
He's industrious.
He would hate to think he was like me.
He does the work. I do the cleanup. Then we fight.
We will get this next book when he's damn well ready to give it to us, and not until then.
So that's what we got to date.
For them, words matter, mood matters, rhythm matters, commas matter, semicolons matter, and the fights go on.
Sometimes I'm looking for an adjective. I make a whole list.
But if he overuses them, it doesn't read well.
We've had some real fights about sections that he's wanted to cut out.
It was not that I was trying to tear his bleeding heart out of his chest.
They both want the best book possible. They both do. And they both want it for each other.
50 years, 5 books, 4,888 pages, and they're not finished yet.
A lot of angry things were said.
It was not because I didn't think it was valuable material.
But I just wasn't going to do that. Okay, we're ready to go.
Now that's a good ending, because I'm editing. Because that's what I do.
Oh,
so we are ready to go.
Woo! Lizzie, I'm filled with joy and a little bit teary at the same time watching that trailer. I told Lizzie before we started today, I watched the movie for the 4th time last night. One thing that I want to tell everybody who's here, hi everyone. I have known Lizzie her entire life. She was born about 7 or 8 months after I was born. And my mother appeared in that trailer. She said Bob Gottlieb is a superb editor. My mother is Bob Caro's agent. She also worked on Michael Crichton with your dad, Lizzie. She worked on Nora Ephron, John le Carré with your dad, Toni Morrison with your dad. So I grew up with Bob and Maria is also a character, Lizzie's mother, in the film, as tutelary adult spirits of my childhood, and Lizzie and her wonderful brother Nicky as my playmates. So watching this movie for me and it was so interesting, Lizzie. The first thing that I want to ask you, I so identified with you that you never met Caro, because I may have met him once or twice, but I don't remember meeting him. And there were many of my mother's clients who, like Toni Morrison, was like my aunt, right? Joan Didion, extremely close family friend. I just didn't meet him. And you met him for the first time at your father's 80th birthday party, which my mother, I'm sure, was at. And then you conceived the idea for the film because you heard him speaking about your father in an interview. How did you convince these two irascible, brilliant, charming, hilarious titans to do this film with you?
Okay. Thank you, Priscilla, Heidi. So happy to be here.
Lizzie.
Great to have you.
I have several answers to that, and they're all true, but they're a little contradictory.
Your dad would approve of that.
Oh, okay, good.
Yes.
For a long time, I thought I should try to make a film about my father. And people kept saying, you should make a film about your father. And I thought, I can't make a film that says, look how awesome my dad is. Like, nobody wants to see that.
Yeah.
And I don't have a film I want to make either that's like, oh, my dad isn't so, it's just like, I couldn't make a film that was just a love letter or an homage to my dad. So I kind of put that aside and I thought I'll make other films. And I hadn't met Bob Caro. So many, I think like you, Priscilla, I grew up in a house that was filled with writers. My mother's an actor, filled with actors and writers, very vibrant, very over the top, a little crazy, a little wonderful. I don't think I knew how eccentric it was until I grew up and realized other people didn't live that way. So I think the same people were going from your house to my house, right?
And your family was going to my house, spending the weekend. We were at each other's birthday parties. Gordon Lish was getting drunk in the kitchen. I mean, it was crazy, right? But we thought it was normal, Lizzie. We thought it was normal.
It was normal. And so Bob Caro, I was very aware of. I had read The Power Broker, but I never met him. There was something different and special and a little mysterious about their dynamic, my dad and Bob Caro. And I threw a party for my dad's 80th birthday. And there were a lot of people there. Your mom was there. It was at my house. And this very gracious man said to me, what do you think about the Barclays? I live in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
He was asking me about the Barclays Center and how it was changing the neighborhood. And I was not thinking, I was distracted. I was serving food. And I was like, and I started going on about like urban planning and traffic in Brooklyn. And suddenly mid-sentence, I was like, I think I'm Robert Caro. I'm telling him things about urban planning. This is mortified, turned bright red. He was so lovely and gracious. So that was really the first time I remember meeting him.
Lizzie, I've never heard that anecdote before. I love that. And I have a confession to make. Heidi, you said you're a fan of Bob Caro. I am a fan because so many people that I respect and admire, including my mother, revere him. I have never read a word. And Lizzie, it took your film. I have the book on my shelf. I have now gotten it down. It is going to be my summer reading.
Oh my God.
Because your film made me want to read it.
You're so lucky because the thing, like those books look intimidating, but you start and within one paragraph, you're so hooked. They're so compelling. They're page turners. You can't stop. So, okay. So to continue to try to answer your question.
Yes.
I then sometime after that, my dad was given an award and he hated awards and he would never do it. But for some reason he said he would receive this award. Anyway, Bob Caro presented the award and I was there and I heard him talk about fighting with my father. And somebody said, what do you fight about? And he sort of got very serious and he said, we have very different feelings about the semicolon. And everyone laughed. It was very funny. And I was on a walk with a friend the next day. And it was like a bolt of lightning. I thought, well, that's the film. Yes. There are these two men who do not have a smooth relationship. So many of my father's writers, they were so close. He and Toni Morrison, he says, we breathe the same way.
Yes.
We just look at something and it's fine.
Yep.
Or Nora Ephron lived in our house with her children, or he wouldn't be getting divorced, like intimate friends, families, but here are these two men who have been working together for 50 years and they were both edging towards being 90 years old and working so intensely together. And I just thought, well, that's the movie. Yeah. If I can do it. It just suddenly, which is a little crazy because why would anybody think that a movie should be made of two 90-year-old men who sit in chairs quietly thinking about words, but I called my dad. I've told this story before, but this is how it happened. I called him and I was like, I've had the best idea. I'm going to make a film about you and Bob Caro. I said it like
you announced it like it was a fait accompli.
I know. I just like his tone is so. He said, absolutely not. I was like fierce and definitive, and I was said, please, and he said no with total ferocity and finality. And I kept asking. I mean, I waited weeks, months, whatever. I kept asking. And one day I think he was just annoyed. And he said, well, you can ask Bob Caro, but he's going to say no. And that was then, of course, terrifying. So I wrote Bob Caro a letter because
He doesn't do email, right? He doesn't do, according to my mom, he doesn't do email.
Yeah. He doesn't. You can email Ina and maybe get a response. But no, so I sent him a letter and he called me and he was so lovely and so gracious and said a nicer version of absolutely. And then he
how
said,
many times did you have to ask? Do you remember?
In that call, he said, you know what, I think he said admired your other films, or maybe it was a film about my brother. And he said, so why don't you come and just chat? We can sit in my office and chat. And somehow in that conversation in his office, something shifted. And he said, you know, I've never seen a film about a writer and an editor. And I don't think people understand what that is, what that relationship is, and what an editor does.
Yeah.
He said, I think this could be meaningful. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll do it as long as I never have to appear in the same room as your father. And then I thought, well, is a hilarious challenge that is kind of a little bit maddening, but also irresistible and charming. So I started interviewing them separately, always thinking, I'm going to get them together one day I'll get them together. And eventually I did.
Oh, and then wandering through the halls of Knopf in search of pencils. I mean, for that scene alone, this film is gold. Sharpening the pen. Someone says, oh, I have a pencil sharpener. No, it can't be a mechanical pencil. It has to be a real pencil. Lizzie, you know, it's so funny because my mother, who appears in the film more extensively than I had remembered, when I watched it again, and I was like, she looks great. Lady in red, looking elegant and beautiful. And she's so funny in it. You could just see.
When I got there to interview her, she looked fabulous as always. But she said to me, when I did the Joan Didion film, they had a hair and makeup person.
I thought she looked better in this one, Lizzie.
I'm so glad.
My mom needs her own IMDb page now. She's now in the Tom Wolfe one too. She's in the Tom Wolfe documentary as well. But she looks the best and appears the best in yours. But I remember when she told me, because I heard from her that you were doing this film. And then you sent me that footage that you found. That footage. I mean, Lizzie, my mother in pink and your dad looking like I remembered him. I had a little crush on your dad when I was little.
You did?
I really did. He was so playful and mischievous and fun and brilliant and tuned into us little girls. And you always had this feeling you could never predict what he was going to say or do.
It's true.
And he's a high-low person, as I am. And so I always identified. He didn't disapprove of my reading The Hardy Boys. He celebrated that. But
can you tell us a little more about that footage?
Oh yeah, Lizzie, talk about that footage. How did you find that?
We had a really wonderful archival researcher, and we were looking, you know, for anything from that era. So must have been like 1970, maybe. Priscilla, do you know what year? I think it was 1970.
It was around the time I was born.
Yeah.
So, and that we were both born. Yeah, sometime around then. My mother had that bob.
Yeah, amazing. Well, this is a footage from a 1970 panel of two guys smoking cigarettes. They're all sitting in like 1970s swivel chairs, which nobody would put you in a swivel chair for an interview anymore. Like they're all like squirming around. And it's my dad and Lynn talking about the publishing industry, and they look so young, so gorgeous. But she's also like, you can see she's a little nervous. She's not used to being interviewed.
Lizzie, she speaks in almost like that faux English accent that actors spoke in the 40s and 50s.
My dad does too.
He does a little bit. You're right.
Yes, they're being proper interviewees. And but you can also see they're completely themselves, and they're completely the people they became later, and you feel their passionate love for publishing.
Absolutely.
Books.
Absolutely.
It's palpable.
It's palpable. And Lizzie, you also feel my mother's just delight in your father. Like he starts to say something, I can see her because I know her. I can see her trying not to crack up. And I just want to read you. I went back and found this interview with my mother from Poets and Writers in 2008, something she said about your dad. Mm-hmm. Tell us that the interviewer, Jofi Ferrari Adler, who's a big editor now, said, tell me about some of the big personalities from those days in the book world. And my mom's first answer was, well, there were a lot of them. Bob Gottlieb, a genius. From your perspective as an agent, what is his genius? In the first place, he could read an 800-page manuscript in a night and come back to you the next day and give you a perfect analysis. And he talks about this in the film, how we thought it was rude. Like, it's torture, right? To leave writers on tenterhooks waiting for his reaction. Also, Bob never let a manuscript lie around. You would never hear from him, oh, I have 7 manuscripts on my desk. I can't get to yours till a month from now. Bob also has such an incredibly big personality. And I always said that Bob has a big ego, which he charmingly admits to in your film, but he can lend it to his writers so that they share it. Bob Caro is one of my clients, and it's written into his contract that he has to have Bob as his editor. And I had forgotten that. And then the interviewer says, your career seems to bridge the small independent shops to the corporatization. And my mom says, I always say to Bob Gottlieb, who's still a very close personal friend, you couldn't stand to be in publishing today. And he says, I know. It's very corporatized. These big conglomerates, we began to worry about it. And I think that this movie is, even as it's this beautiful, and now sadly, I mean, I was asking you before we got on, right? Your father left this world less than a year ago, right? Just about a year ago, which makes watching the film very, very hard for me now. Hearing his voice and missing him, but so it now has become a kind of elegy for him. But it is a celebration of books and reading and editing and the care and the effort and taking the long view with works of art, investing in works that take a long time. And that, I mean, I wonder if that struck you, Heidi. There's that moment where my mother says she doesn't think it could ever happen again.
That 100% struck me. I mean, that was actually going to be one of the questions that I was going to ask, because I wonder, like, today, you know, would this happen? It's sort of like, but a lot of industries are like that now, not just publishing. You know, would these kinds of projects like that require so much work, would they even get made today? You know, because it's just such a different landscape. So maybe you want to speak to that a little bit, Lizzie.
Well, I think that that's part of, I have several answers to that too. But I think that, you know, I made the film on a powerful impulse and for personal and emotional reasons. But I think I also made the film because I thought, I have access to bring people into this secret world of how books come to be, or how books did come to be in the 20th century.
Yes.
And the sort of alchemy of what goes into those. Nobody is able to see that or to know that. And it is a vanishing world. And I thought, let's come with me and let's look behind the curtain and see what this has been.
Yeah.
And so I did make the film in a way to show something that is ending. On the other hand, I have, you know, one of my closest friends is Jordan Pavlin, who is the editor-in-chief of Knopf.
Oh, adore Jordan.
And, you know, Jordan is a lover of books. And she, you know, I feel like there are so many wonderful people in publishing who are publishing wonderful books, and so many incredible writers. So I feel, and I don't know, I spent this last year going around the country speaking about this film, and there are readers everywhere who are reading. So I also feel hopeful. And I think my dad felt hopeful for books. They matter. People care about them. People read them, and that's not going to stop. So I feel like it's not I don't want that to be totally a depressing message. It's also a celebration.
That's
also a celebration, and also I think something that works to galvanize people, right? So it's both. I love what you said about sort of giving that access behind the curtain and showing that alchemy of how books are made, and even the covers of those Caro books. I heard an interview with your dad where he said the same person designed those covers that designed the cover of The Andromeda Strain, Michael Crichton's first book. He was such a versatile book cover designer.
Oh, I want to say something about the books. Can I say something about the physical
books?
There were a lot of things we had to cut out that were very painful of the movie, but one of the saddest things to cut out was we interviewed Andy Hughes, who was the head of production at Knopf for, I don't know, 40 years, whatever. And he talked about how in producing the paper, that the attention that is given to these things, the thickness of the paper that they use in the Caro books and the creaminess, creaminess is extremely important to them. And they bind the books even today, the Lyndon Johnson books, in cloth with gold embossed letters. And he said, because out of respect for Robert Caro and out of respect for the readers who have devoted so much of their lives to reading these books, we do not want the quality of the books to degrade only because time has marched on. He said, we want to make it look like a unified effort. So when the 5 volumes sit together on a shelf, they will look like one thing. And every time I listen to that, it makes me cry. Because how extraordinary to have a whole publishing house that is devoted to creating the best physical book they possibly can, that supports the work and supports the readers. Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, you're making me teary now. I love that so much. And Lizzie, you know, I really do feel that your movie will. I mean, Jordan is in the film, right? A little, and I saw her interviewing you. I think it was at the New York Public Library with both of the Bobs, who were hilarious. And is an extraordinary editor, a beautiful human being, and someone whose enthusiasm reminds me of your father, right? Your father's memoir was called Avid Reader. It's an incredible book. Everyone get it. My son actually read it before I did. My Yale sophomore, who's an avid reader himself and reveres your father. But I agree with you completely that all this doom and gloom and, oh, great, but we don't invest in books over the long haul anymore. We want to recognize that that's happening less and less, but we also want to encourage people, right, to support writers and books in a way that celebrates, right, work. I mean, I'm one to talk. It took me 12 years in between my books, right? And you took 7 years to make your film, Lizzie. And I heard an interview with you where you talked about how as you were working and you were thinking, oh my gosh, this movie is taking such a long time. Bob Caro's respect and admiration for you were growing. And he said, this is my kind of filmmaker. Taking her time and getting it right. She's turning every page in the making of this film. Now, Lizzie, you said something that reminded me of another question that I have for you. What were some of the things, other than what the answer that you just gave, that were the most painful to cut? Because, you know, I love that scene where your father talks about, I'm not like I'm ripping his heart out of his chest, but we couldn't physically bind the book. Were we to include all of these things that Bob Caro was fighting for, right? It was still 1,200 pages, right? What they ended up with. What were some other things? I'm so glad you kept the scene in with your son and your dad. That was one of my favorite scenes in the Strand. I mean, talk about celebrating books. And your son is such a wonderful narrator, sort of, oh, this one, oh, that one, and pointing to the different books. And your father's humility really comes through in that scene. Your dad definitely doesn't like to accept awards. My mom doesn't either. So what were some other things that you couldn't include that you wish you could have?
Well, okay.
Okay. Here it comes.
There is a really good one. And It's a little bit of a long story, and I have told this before, so I apologize if anyone's heard it before. But it's okay. I'm going to take a sip of water.
I will too.
Do you want to hear this? It's a slightly complex story, and I haven't told it for a while, so I can try.
Okay.
I think it's worth it.
We are here to honor your attempt, Lizzie. Here we go.
Okay. So, my father told this story where he said, early on in editing The Power Broker, I thought, how can I possibly fact check all of this? How do I know that Bob Caro knows all these things he says he knows? What is my responsibility? And he said, so he took a random thing and he said, here's a scene early on in The Power Broker, he said to Bob, where you describe, okay, in 1919, Robert Moses, young Robert Moses, this story is especially hard because everyone is named Robert. Okay, young Robert Moses started out as a reformer, as a progressive reformer.
Okay.
And he came from a rather well-to-do family, and he kept getting sued for stuff he was doing. So Robert Moses's parents there's a scene in The Power Broker where the senior Moseses are sitting on a porch over breakfast, and Mr. Moses opens the newspaper and sees that their son is going to get sued again. And Mr. Moses says to Mrs. Moses, this is going to cost us $18,000. And my father took Bob Caro aside and he said, Bob, this is a wonderful, passage. Yeah. But I'm sorry, how could you possibly know what Mr. Moses said to Mrs. Moses on a porch in the Catskills in 1919? And Bob didn't blink. He said, oh, well, that's easy. He said, I knew that the senior Moseses gave money to a camp in the Catskills for underprivileged kids from the Jewish settlement house on the Lower East Side. Okay. So I went to the settlement house and I got all the records of all the names of all the children who went to this camp over the period of however many decades that the Moseses went there. He said, he also said, I knew that the senior Moseses spent a week or two every summer at the camp to kind of oversee their largesse. He said, so I took these lists of all the campers, and I have, of course, phone books from all the, major cities across the United States. And I just looked up all the names on those lists with all the, phone books. And I called anybody with those names. And I happened to find a man who, remember, in like 1970, going back to 1919, right? He's like, so I found a man who 40 years earlier had been a camper at that camp. And it had been his job to deliver the newspaper each morning to the cottage where the Moseses stayed. Well, on this morning, he overheard Mr. Moses say to Mrs. Moses, this is going to cost us $18,000.
So this is the exhaustive research that everybody talks about, about Robert Caro, right? Like, it's this is why it takes time, to.
It takes time. And my mother said at that point, I never asked him again how he knew what he knew, because I in fact heard that he would tell me.
Oh, Lizzie, that is too. I thought you were going to say something like, and that year, 18,000 wasn't delivered to the camp. And so this is, what could be better than this? This is an ear witness.
But it's just for this tiny, tiny moment. And it's such a window into what he has done over and over and over again. But it was too big a story to fit into this film.
Well, thank goodness we shared it tonight. Oh my goodness, Lizzie. I was imagining the scene on the porch. This is going to cost us $18,000. Now, when you mentioned the Catskills, that reminds me, and the Jewish families and the underprivileged, something that really struck me about your film, the similarities between the Bobs in terms of their fathers and their relationships with their fathers. And I don't think I had ever known about your father's relationship with his father. They both had stern, angry, difficult, business-oriented fathers. My father, very similar situation, conservative lawyer. My father felt like an oddball and a weirdo in his family. They didn't think that you could be a drama or a literary critic. Like, what did that even mean? And it was so interesting to me how you know, they didn't, and there was an interview that I watched where someone asked Bob Caro, what did you learn? Or did you learn anything about Bob Gottlieb? And the thing he said was about his boyhood, about his childhood. And he didn't elaborate on that, but it was a very poignant aspect of the film for me, that these were men who weren't supported, who weren't honored, who didn't have their individuality and their distinctive kind of literary, artistic temperaments validated by their fathers.
Yeah, I had no idea that that was going to emerge as a theme in the film.
Yeah.
And, you know, I knew my father had a pretty terrible father.
Yeah.
And I came to learn about Bob Caro's pretty terrible father.
Terrible father.
And then Bob Caro, we have the scene in the movie where he unearths through elaborate means Lyndon Johnson's terrible relationship.
I was just going to mention that. Exactly.
And then my father quotes King Lear every 5 seconds in this movie. You know,
I was all about that, Lizzie.
I thought it was super interesting in the film how, you know, Caro described how he sort of pulls that story out of Lyndon Johnson, how he takes him to the house, you know, and sits behind him and, you know, sort of gets him like the light was coming in a certain way and how he really got him to, you know, like remember the story in a very different way. And I'm wondering, when you were making this film, did you sort of like take a little bit of that with you into your documentary process?
You know, it's a daunting thing to have Robert Caro kind of in front of you as you're trying to make anything. So, of course, I look to him and to his work at all times as a kind of North Star. Not to say I approached anything like it, but yeah, so we have this moment where I went with Bob and Ina to Texas.
That was an incredible part of the film.
It was an amazing just experience to have, but he took us to Lyndon Johnson's boyhood home. And I find so poignant how Bob Caro refers to boyhood. Like, you know, he doesn't say childhood, he doesn't say youth, he says boyhood. So we went to the Johnson's boyhood home and Bob Caro sat in this room where Lyndon Johnson had been a child. And he tells the story of how he, Bob, after a lot of effort, convinced Sam Houston Johnson, Lyndon's brother, to come and sit in the room and feel the room and see the shadows and the light and it pulls something out of Sam Houston Johnson that reveals an aspect of Lyndon Johnson he hadn't ever spoken about before. And similarly, there we are in that same room watching Bob Caro re-experience his moment of pulling the story out of Sam Houston Johnson. It's a moment that I think I will remember my whole life. Yeah, it was a kind of magical moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like when, you know, if you can sort of get the person to re-experience the story as they're, you know, feeling it, then it sort of gets them to talk about it in such a different way. You know, I wonder, I also wanted to ask you about your editing process, like, you know, from a filmmaker's perspective, like, not necessarily like how many hours of footage did you have or anything like that, but like, you know, what was the process like, you know, like how long did it take you? Was it, you know, overly daunting? And did you take some of your father's advice on editing while going through that process for the filmmaking? Because it's different editing a film than it is editing a book, for sure. But I'm sure there's similarities.
Yeah, editing a film, editing a documentary film is almost closer to writing than to editing a book. Yes. You know, you're especially because you don't have a script, and some documentarians, you know, I think are much more scripted as they go in. I sort of went in thinking, I don't really know the answer, but I know there's something there, and I'm just going to follow my instincts towards what works. But I worked with two brilliant, extraordinary women to edit this film. And I went in kind of feeling, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff. How are we going to fit it? How are we going to make it all make sense? You know, so we worked very together, first with a woman named Molly Bernstein and then a woman named Kristen Newtiel. And we sort of sat together in a room saying, well, there's this scene. We've got the boyhood home. And then we have my father's collection of lucite handbags from the 1950s.
Oh.
And then we have the highways of New York City and the racism built into the infrastructure of New York City. And then we have the importance of punctuation. And then we have terrible fathers. And then we have my wonderful, it's like, how can these things all fit into one narrative? Felt incredibly daunting and at times impossible. But we just kept coming back to, I don't know, I teach documentary filmmaking, and I always tell my students, you have to identify a central question that you're asking. That's not the plot. It's not the what's going to happen, but like to identify a question for yourself that your film is seeking an answer to. And then I was cheating and thought, I don't really need to know that. I say, I'm so, there are a lot of questions, and I really eventually had to get kind of firm with myself and identify the question I was asking. And once we did, I think it became easier. And
Lizzie, what was the question?
Well, Priscilla, I guess it's a two-part question.
Okay.
Which is sort of, what have we gained because of these two men, and what do we lose when we lose them? Right?
Yeah,
that's really for bigger people, and also a question for myself.
Wow, Lizzie, that just gave me, the first sentence of The Critic's Daughter is, I lost my father for the first time when I was 10 years old. And this book is my attempt to find him. I mean, the dynamic is very similar, what you're describing. I was going to say that at the same time, I think you beautifully pose those questions and suggest the richness, the variety of answers to those questions. But I also think one of the things that I love most about the film is your openness to being surprised. And you said something about how, and inserting yourself in the film, having you, like, we can see you, we can hear you, you don't edit out Bob Caro using your name when he answers some of the questions. It's very charming, it's very endearing, and it almost has, the adventures, you use that in the subtitle. It has this feeling of a kind of picaresque novel, or, it reminds me of almost like a Tom Jones or an 18th century novel, a sentimental journey, right? There's a sense of traveling and journeying and adventuring and meandering in the most productive and fertile and beautiful ways. And I think the music contributes to that too. The music was incredible, I have to say. I mean, it's jaunty when it needs to be, it's stirring when it needs to be, it's poignant. And the movie is just electric with delight in these two men's minds and their personalities, but it doesn't sugarcoat the complexity, the darkness that they both possess, right, from the childhood. And I have to say, your mother. We have not discussed your mother as a beneficent wry fairy in this film, where she talks about how she's afraid she's going to die from the fumes of the. I screamed with laughter. I was like, I would be worrying about that too, right? And then you pull out to that shot of the purses on the wall. I mean, it's just.
People need to see this film just for that, like just to know about that scene with the handbags. And I'm not going to give too much away, because I think like some of the audience probably has seen the film already and some people have not, but like, yeah, you got to see it just for that scene alone.
I will just say my father did have the world's largest collection of lucite handbags in the world from the 1950s. And they lined the walls of my parents' bedroom, and they're about to be auctioned off.
Wait, Lizzie, are they really? I have to tell my mother to bid on one of them. She didn't bid on the Joan Didion auction. I said, Mom, come on, we need to keep one of Bob's bags. All right, I'm going to tell her. Wow.
No, my mom is amazing. And I'm actually, because I seem to want to keep everything in the family, I'm right now up in the Berkshires directing a play starring my mother.
Amazing.
Lizzie, can you drop that information into the chat? Like, when is this play happening?
Sure, I'll drop it in the chat. It's happening very soon at the Berkshire Theater Group. We're in rehearsals.
Because I will say that my father, an eminent theater critic, always said that Maria Tucci's career should have been much bigger than it was, and that she was an extraordinary actress. And I think he also had a little crush on her. But don't we all, Lizzie? Don't we all?
Lizzie, just another question for you. Like, you know, as Priscilla's mentioned that you are in the film, you know, you don't edit yourself out like completely, right? Can you tell us a little bit about, did you sort of waver on your decision, like whether you would do that or not, whether you'd be in it or not? Because I know that that's a thing, you know, for documentary filmmakers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I knew this was never going to be an objective film, right? It's a totally subjective film. It's a film about my father. And so I knew that these men had to be speaking to me, not to a filmmaker, which was obvious for my dad. And when I spoke to Bob Caro, I was like, just, you know, so he always says, your father. And he says, Lizzie, you know, I shy away. I didn't want this in any way to be a film that's like, look at my journey. Look what I've learned. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I feel like I am the least interesting person in this whole dynamic. But I also thought, we're only here. We're only allowed this access because of me. And my relationship to my father is extremely important and is a part of it. And it brings out his charm. And I thought having him talk to my son is more charming than having him say, here are the books I edited, you know? So
100%.
I think what was tricky was to figure out how much I needed to put myself in rather than could take myself out. So I put myself in a little more than I was comfortable with. But really just like in the beginning, and then I return a little bit at the end. In the middle, I'm just kind of in the background.
Yeah, I felt like it was the perfect amount, actually.
I thought it was the perfect amount too. And I think absolutely that one of the things that I found most surprising about the movie was watching Bob Caro warming up to you. And because, I mean, anyone who's met Lizzie in life knows she is one of the sweetest, kindest, love. Ever since you were a little girl, this is my memory of you. I tell my mom, like, you took care of all the. She's just she puts people at ease. Your mother does this too, and I could see you putting Bob Caro at ease, and I could see him opening up, and I could see him relaxing, and I could see by the end here's Lizzie, like he was excited to see you and giving you his courtly kisses and hugging you. And it was so charming and sweet. And I think, you know, I tried to do this in my book too, but one of the things that's so interesting about these colossal intellectuals is what are the similarities and the differences between their professional and their personal right, personae, right, or their beings, and how do, you know, the charm and the humor and remember there's that moment in the film where your dad says, if only I'd had 2 daughters. It killed me because I remember he used to say to my father he was jealous that my father had 2 daughters. But just his sheer unadulterated delight in you. And you could watch Bob Caro becoming paternal towards you and taking pride in you. And feeling joyous when you came in, even as he was like, nope, not going to show you this. Like he would start to show you, and that scene with the crawl space, Lizzie. Oh my gosh, when you're like, are you running out of room? And he's like, yes. Every once in a while, I get my ladder and I get up on it and I push. I screamed with laughter. I mean,
right. So, what was that like for you, Lizzie? Like how your relationship changed with Robert Caro, getting the film to the end, from your perspective?
I think when we started, he was appropriately a little, I wouldn't say wary of me, but, you know, he agreed to do this, but with cautiousness, which is appropriate, you know? And then I think as the years went on and as he saw, you know, he would say, oh, I see you interviewed Majora Carter. Oh, you know, he was impressed that we were being industrious, which my father says is one of his favorite, you know, the quality he honors and admires above all others. And then my dad says that amazing line. He's like, anyone can be adorable, but not everyone can be industrious results. Like, it's such an amazing line.
Your father was certainly both, Lizzie.
That is so true.
So adorable.
And so I think that Bob Caro came to appreciate not just me, I had two incredible producing partners, Jen Small and Joanne Nurnberg. And I think that he came to appreciate our industriousness and to kind of trust what we were doing. And I really think that we became friends over the course of this.
That's amazing. And what better compliment about industriousness than from Robert Caro, right? It's pretty amazing. I think there might be some questions so I don't know if we have any questions. So we're gonna give a little time for people to write some questions if you wanna ask any for Lizzie Gottlieb or Priscilla Gilman. And then we'll see. Okay, so here's one from Eileen Brownson for Lizzie. Any plans to make a film about your mother?
Yeah. Well, I made a film about my brother and made a film about my dad, made a film about some ladies who I love. I'm doing a play with my mom, and my mother is an incredible actress. And so instead of making a film about her, I mean, who knows what might happen, but right now we're working on a play together, which is such an incredible experience. And it's what she loves and is wonderful at. And so a play instead of a film. Is that enough? Is that okay?
Well, yeah. I mean, what more can we ask for? Completely. So besides, can you talk a little bit about the composer who you worked with?
Claire and Olivier Manchin. So Claire and Olivier Manchin are a couple. They're composers, and actually they're working on the play we're doing right now as well.
Oh my gosh.
It's such a delight. It's not just that they're geniuses, they are musical geniuses, I think, but they have this ability to collaborate and to understand how to not just make beautiful music, but make beautiful music that supports the dramatic moment you're crafting.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I learned so much about collaboration while making this film. Obviously, the film is about collaboration, but also I had the incredible privilege of collaborating with people who are brilliant at what they do. And the work with Claire and Olivier was an example of that, of just like, oh, I can do my work and you do your work, and then we'll kind of dance around with it and make every scene exactly what we want it to be.
Exactly. Lizzie, I'm glad you and Heidi, I'm glad you brought up music, because one of the most compelling moments in the film for me was Caro talking about wanting to get that opening page right. Mm-hmm. And he reads the Iliad and he starts to think in terms of rhythm and cadence and notes almost. And then you cut to Ethan Hawke, one of my first crushes and my perpetual crush. So that was a fun aspect of the film for me, Lizzie. Reading beautifully. And I was watching at this time with my son, who's a classical guitarist and a singer. And it was like the light bulb. He was like, wow, it's music. It's writing to have a musical. It's so important to have that sense of rhythm and tone and cadence. And I just thought the way you set that up when you had the text from the Iliad and then you went to him. And that brings me to another question that we haven't raised yet, which is that in addition to the two Bobs and my mom, you have all of these, what we would call talking heads, right? You have Colm Tóibín, you have Lisa Lucas, you have Daniel Mendelsohn, you have Bill Clinton, you have Jordan, you have Kathy Horrigan, right? And Ethan Hawke starts the film. How did you approach them? I mean, Colm Tóibín in particular, I just thought he was captivated in this movie.
I know. We interviewed him. I wanted to just play his entire hour-and-a-half interview because
I need to see that someday, Lizzie, because I was seriously captivated. I watched him 3 times in a row. I rewound.
He's magnificent. What an incredible writer. But to hear him talk, not just his accent, but it's his accent, of course, helps. But he's so insightful about Caro and about the drama.
Yes.
The drama in Robert Caro's writing.
Yes.
What a joy. What a joy to talk to him. And the other people, we just kind of felt our way along and thought, well, what do we need? Who do we need to hear from? Who can talk about, what Robert Moses's highways did to the Bronx? And there's Majora Carter, who is working right now to undo some of what Caro revealed that Moses had done to her neighborhood. So
exactly,
and so we just kind of felt our way forward and thought, who can speak to the different things we need to hear about?
Yeah, she was beautiful. Lisa Lucas is one of my favorite people, and I just thought was so wonderful. And she said she never wants to finish the book because she always has to have a little Caro.
I know.
Yeah, when you have to finish a book, it's always a little bit sad at the end, and you don't want it when it's a really good book, and you don't want it to be over. I wonder. Okay, so there's a question that just popped up. That's why I'm like looking to the side here, from Heather Sessler. Do you have any insight into what the editing process may be for the LBJ book 5 now?
Priscilla?
Lizzie, I did text my mother about this 2 hours ago.
Mm-hmm.
As of 7:57, she has not responded. So he's working. We hope it is.
I know he's working. He's working incredibly hard every day.
Yep.
He doesn't usually have anybody edit it until the book is done.
Exactly. Your dad said that. He doesn't edit. And the scene in your film at the end, I know some people were like, oh, that's from this new volume of that's not. That was Working.
Exactly.
This small book, right, that came out a few years ago. Yeah.
Right. I feel like that's the question that we're not supposed to ask, right? But
but everyone does.
But everyone asks it, right? And this is a silly question, but so in the film, Caro is, using carbon paper in his typewriter. Where do you even get carbon paper for a typewriter anymore? That just blew me away.
I know that there's a special shop, I believe in Midtown, where he goes periodically to get the ribbons for his typewriter. And they try to get more in, and they let him know when they have the ribbons, but there's some ribbons that are too thick and he doesn't like. And then there's some ribbons that are too thin, so he wants the ones that are just right. And he gets them. I don't know about the carbon paper. Maybe it's from the same shop.
Heidi, I'll see if I can get an answer for you on that.
It's a silly question, but
That's silly. I love it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think we're sort of approaching 8. And there's one more question that I can pull from the chat here. So I'm not sure who this is from, but it says, thank you both for this amazing Talk for Culture connection. Can you both make a statement on the recent rash of book bans at libraries in the United States? And why do you think this is? Thank you.
Why do we think this is? Oh,
Priscilla, over to you.
Oh. Lizzie, the most banned book in the United States most years out of the last 5 years is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which I don't think your dad did. I think Sula was the first book that Toni did with your father. My mother did represent The Bluest Eye.
So that's the only book of hers that he didn't edit. He edited everything from then on.
Yes. So I didn't need to ask my mom who edited The Bluest Eye. Why is this happening? Because we've got far-right politicians policing our children's minds in ways that are detrimental to their learning and their education, that are making blanket judgments about great works of literature and any work that has anything that person doesn't agree with, right? I think it's a mixture. The most banned books are usually a mixture of classic works of literature. The Bluest Eye has an incest subplot in it. That may be one of the reasons. And then there are YA books that are banned because they feature LGBTQ characters, or they feature unmarried people having sex or something like that. It's extremely distressing. Heidi, you remember last time we talked about my father was the president of PEN America. He organized, in the early 80s, he organized a big event against the book bans that were happening then. And I remember Roxanne said, it's important to remember that these come in waves. This isn't the first time we faced a wave of book banning, right? In the 80s, it was Reagan, right? So, but we do need to get out there and fight them and protest them with everything that we have.
Right. Yeah. Similar to the satanic panic, coming in waves kind of makes me think of that. It's just like this
Exactly.
pendulum swinging back and forth.
Yes.
And it sort of definitely comes in waves. I think that's a really good way of putting it. Lizzie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything there.
Everything Priscilla said.
Okay. So anything else that you would like to add or ask, or before we close out?
Everyone needs to see this film. It's one of the best films I've ever seen. Truly. And it's, obviously I have personal reasons for saying that, but I think it's a magnificent work of art. It's a testament to the power of art. It is about friendship and collaboration. It's about fathers and daughters, fathers and sons. It's about the history of America. There's so many reasons why you will be enchanted, moved. You will learn so much from the movie. It's extraordinary. And it's just such a joy to be here with my childhood friend, Lizzie.
Well, Priscilla, thank you so much. Heidi, thank you so much. And just want to say thank you to the Queens Public Library for doing this, for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is wonderful to hear you two talk about your childhood and your experiences together, and about this wonderful film that I thoroughly enjoyed twice and will probably watch a third time. And just to remind everyone that courtesy of the Queens Public Library, you can still watch the film up until May 14th through the link that you should be able to find underneath this video in the comments, and you should be able to still watch it. If you end up watching this after May 14th, I'm sure it's available streaming everywhere, and you can just look up Turn Every Page by Lizzie Gottlieb, and I'm sure that you will get all the information that you need.
Heidi, you've been so wonderful. I just want to say thank you to you. Thank you to Dan, who organizes this incredible series. And I think my father and Lizzie's father would so approve of and celebrate this wonderful series that Dan curates.
Yes, thank you, Dan. Thank you to Dan, and thank you, Lizzie and Priscilla. I'm so happy that both of you were able to join us today. This was amazing. It was so great to talk to both of you. And yeah, just thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.